The filthy truth about medieval medicine. Medieval medicine was not a system built on cleanliness, comfort, or scientific proof. It was a world where sickness was explained through imbalance, treatment often meant pain, and survival depended as much on luck as on skill. For most people living between the fall of Rome and the dawn of the Renaissance, medicine was less about healing and more about enduring whatever their healers believed would drive illness away. At the heart of medieval medical thought was the ancient theory of the four humors, inherited from classical authors like Hippocrates and later expanded by Galen. According to this model, the human body was governed by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health meant balance. Disease meant that one humor had become excessive or corrupted. Fever, too much blood. Melancholy, an excess of black bile. A cough, phlegm overrunning the body. The logic was simple and tragically wrong, because illness was thought to come from imbalance. Treatment focused on removal rather than repair. The most common solution was bloodletting. Patients were bled from the arm, neck, or even behind the ear to release the excess blood believed to cause illness. This was done with knives, lancets, or leeches, often reused on multiple patients. There was no understanding of infection, no sterilization, and no concept of germs. Weak patients were bled until they fainted, and sometimes until they died, all in the belief that the body was being restored to harmony. Surgery, when required, was crude and terrifying. Most surgical work was not performed by learned physicians, but by barber surgeons, men who cut hair, pulled teeth, lanced boils, and amputated limbs. These procedures were carried out without anesthesia. Alcohol or a leather strap to bite down on was the best pain relief available. Amputations had to be fast, because pain and blood loss could kill a patient in minutes. Survival often depended on how quickly the wound was cauterized with hot iron or boiling oil. Hospitals did exist, but they were very different from modern medical centers. Many were run by religious orders and functioned more like hospices than places of cure. Their primary purpose was spiritual care, not physical recovery. Patients lay in crowded halls, sharing beds, blankets, and diseases. Clean water was scarce, and waste disposal was poor. Ironically, entering a hospital could be more dangerous than staying at home. Medieval doctors also believed that disease could be caused by bad air, known as miasma. Foul smells from swamps, corpses, or dirty streets were thought to poison the body simply by being breathed in. During outbreaks of plague, people burned herbs, carried flowers, or wore masks stuffed with spices to protect themselves from corrupted air. None of this stopped infection, but it provided psychological comfort in a world desperate for explanations. Herbal remedies were another cornerstone of medieval medicine. Some plants, such as willow bark for pain or honey for wound care, actually had mild therapeutic effects. But many treatments were based on symbolism rather than efficacy. Red plants were used to treat blood disorders. Bitter herbs were believed to cure bile-related illnesses. Animal parts, powdered skulls, dried worms, or crushed insects were commonly prescribed. These remedies were expensive, unpleasant, and often useless. Astrology also played a central role in diagnosis and treatment. Medieval physicians believed that the position of planets and stars influenced the human body. Bloodletting charts were based on lunar cycles. Certain days were considered dangerous for surgery because the stars were misaligned. A patient's fate could be decided not by symptoms, but by the movement of Mars or Saturn across the night sky. Childbirth was especially dangerous. Midwives relied on experience rather than formal training, and complications were common. Infections, hemorrhage, and obstructed labor killed countless women. If a mother died, the blame was often placed on her moral failings rather than medical failure. Pain in childbirth was sometimes viewed as divine punishment, making relief morally suspect. Mental illness was treated with even less compassion. Depression, anxiety, or psychosis were often interpreted as spiritual problems, signs of sin, demonic influence, or divine testing. Treatment ranged from prayer and fasting to physical punishment and exorcism. People who needed care were instead isolated, restrained, or driven out of their communities. Perhaps the most brutal truth about medieval medicine is that it often harmed more than it healed. A simple infection could turn fatal after aggressive bloodletting. A survivable injury could become deadly through contamination. Doctors were respected, but their knowledge was limited, their tools primitive, and their confidence often misplaced. And yet, medieval medicine was not practiced out of cruelty. It was built on inherited knowledge, religious belief, and genuine attempts to understand the human body with the tools available at the time. Physicians believed they were helping. Patients submitted because there were no alternatives. Progress would come slowly. Dissection, observation, and experimentation would eventually challenge ancient authorities. The idea that disease had physical causes, not moral or cosmic ones, would take centuries to be accepted. Until then, medieval medicine remained a grim mix of tradition, superstition, pain, and faith. For those who lived through it, survival was not a triumph of science, but of endurance. Now, let the weight of the present day dissolve into the mist. We are moving backward, drifting through the corridors of time, away from the sterile lights of the modern world and into the flickering amber glow of the past. Close your eyes. Imagine you are standing in a stone chamber, the walls thick and cold, keeping the damp night air at bay. The only light comes from a single tallow candle, its flame dancing nervously in the draught, casting long, trembling shadows against the limestone. The room smells of dried sage, old parchment, and the faint, sweet scent of sickness lingering in heavy wool blankets. You can hear the scratching of a quill against rough paper, a rhythmic dry sound like the legs of a beetle, as a physician in a long dark robe records the secrets of the body. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. We find ourselves in the twilight of the 12th century, in a world where the body is not seen as a machine of pumps and wires, but as a vessel of fluids, a microcosm reflecting the elements of the earth itself. The physician here does not look for viruses or bacteria. He looks for the humors. He believes with absolute unshakable certainty that you are a container of 4 distinct liquids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These are not just fluids, they are destiny. They are the wet spring, the dry summer, the cool autumn, and the cold winter, all swirling inside your veins. To be healthy is to be balanced, a state known as eucrasia, where the humors flow in perfect harmony like a choir singing in tune. But illness? Illness is dyscrasia, a discord, a rebellion of the fluids. Imagine the physician leaning over a patient, his face illuminated by that solitary candle. He places a hand on a fevered forehead and does not think of infection. He thinks of fire. He feels the heat and concludes that the blood, hot and wet, like the air of spring, has grown arrogant and excessive. It is crowding the heart, boiling the brain. To him, the redness of the cheeks is not inflammation. It is the blood trying to escape. Historians still argue whether the common folk actually understood these complex Galenic theories, or if they just wanted a potion that tasted bad enough to work. But for the learned doctor, this theory is the bedrock of reality. It explains everything. Why is one man angry and quick to fight? He is choleric, ruled by yellow bile and fire. Why is another man quiet, slow, and pale? He is phlegmatic, ruled by the heavy, watery humor of the lungs. It is a poetic way to view humanity, categorizing our flaws and fevers by the elements of the earth, though it offers little comfort to the man whose fever is burning him alive. The physician consults a heavy book, its leather cover worn smooth by the hands of his predecessors. He reads the words of Galen, the Greek giant whose medical ghost haunted Europe for over 1,000 years. Galen said that nature does nothing in vain, and so the physician trusts that if he can just remove the offending fluid, the body will heal itself. He is a gardener of the flesh, believing he must prune the excess to save the tree. It is a gentle thought, really, were it not for the blades he keeps hidden in his satchel. There is a strange, dark comfort in this room, a belief that there is an answer for everything, even if that answer is wrong. The physician believes he can balance the tides of your body, just as the moon balances the sea. He prepares his tools, not with malice, but with a solemn, pious hope. He does not know that the knife he is polishing carries invisible death upon its blade. He only knows that the balance must be restored, and that sometimes, to save a life, one must spill the very thing that sustains it. The shadows in the room seem to lengthen as he works, the candlelight catching the glint of metal, a prelude to the sharp reality that awaits just beyond the comfort of theory. The glint of that metal signals a shift in our story, a departure from the quiet, theoretical world of the university-trained physician and into the gritty, hands-on reality of the street. For while the learned doctor in his long robes might study the stars and pontificate on the balance of bile, he rarely deigns to dirty his hands with the actual work of cutting. In the medieval mind, surgery is a manual trade, a craft of the hands rather than the intellect, considered far too messy for a man of letters. And so, when the charts have been read and the diagnosis delivered, the physician steps back into the shadows, and a new figure steps forward. The barber surgeon. You have seen his sign, perhaps without realizing its ancient weight. Picture a narrow, winding street in a bustling medieval town like London or Paris. Above a wooden door, a pole protrudes, painted in spiraling stripes of red and white. To the modern eye, it is a quaint symbol of a haircut and a shave. But in these times, it tells a more visceral story. The white represents the linen bandages used to bind a wound, the red, the blood that soaks them. The pole itself symbolizes the stick a patient would grip tightly, knuckles turning white as the barber went to work. It is a grim advertisement fluttering in the breeze, a promise that here pain and relief are offered in equal measure. Step inside his shop, It is not the hushed sanctuary of the physician's study. It is a place of noise and sharp smells. The air here is thick with the scent of stale wine, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of iron. On one side of the room, a man sits, having his beard trimmed, chatting idly about the price of grain. On the other, separated only by a thin curtain, or perhaps nothing at all, a patient prepares for an amputation. The barber-surgeon is a man of practical skill, a jack of all trades who can cut your hair, pull a rotting tooth, lance a boil, or saw off a shattered leg, often using the same set of tools. He is not a villain. He is a necessity. In a world without antibiotics, where a simple fracture can turn into gangrene, a creeping black rot known as Saint Anthony's fire, his blade is often the only thing standing between a patient and the grave. The atmosphere shifts as the barber prepares for a serious procedure. There is no sterile field, no scrubbing of hands. He rolls up his sleeves, revealing arms thick with muscle, necessary strength for the work ahead. His apron is stiff, stained with the memories of 100 previous patients. He is efficient, almost brisk. He knows what modern surgeons will one day rediscover, that in the absence of anesthesia, speed is the greatest mercy he can offer. He arranges his saws and knives on a wooden table. They are not the delicate, laser-honed instruments of today, but heavy carbon steel tools that look more suited to carpentry than medicine. And in a way, that is what this is: carpentry of the bone. Pain relief is the great ghost of this era. It is present only in whispers and wishes. The barber might offer a leather strap to bite on, protecting the tongue from being severed in a moment of agony. He might pour a generous draught of strong wine or ale down the patient's throat, enough to dull the senses, but not enough to stop the heart. Some of the more daring practitioners might employ a soporific sponge. Imagine a sea sponge soaked in a dark, potent brew of opium, mandrake, hemlock, and ivy, then dried in the sun. Before the surgery, it is dipped in hot water and held over the patient's nose. It is a gamble with death itself. Too little, and the patient feels everything. Too much, and they drift into a sleep from which they never wake. Historians still debate how effective these sponges really were, or if the risk of poisoning made them more dangerous than the surgery itself. Most often, the only anesthesia is the sheer, overwhelming shock of the trauma. The barber nods to his assistants, burly men whose job is not to heal, but to hold. They pin the patient down, gripping limbs with the weight of stones. The barber does not hesitate. To hesitate is to torture. He works with a terrifying swiftness. The knife circles the limb to sever the skin and muscle, pulling the flesh back to reveal the bone. Then comes the saw. The sound is a rhythmic, dry rasping that fills the small room. A sound that would haunt the nightmares of anyone who heard it. But it is over in minutes. A good barber-surgeon prides himself on his speed, competing with his peers to see who can remove a leg the fastest. It is a dark sort of sport, but one born of compassion. Every second saved is a second of suffering spared. But the cutting is only half the battle. Now, the blood flows freely, a red river that threatens to carry the patient's life away with it. The barber cannot stitch the arteries closed. The threads he has are thick and dirty, likely to cause infection, and the vessels are too slippery to catch, so he turns to his most feared and vital tool, the cautery iron. It has been resting in a brazier of coals, glowing with a menacing, radiant orange heat. The sight of it strikes a primal fear into the heart of the patient, a terror deeper than the knife. The barber lifts it, the heat radiating against his own face. He presses the glowing metal against the raw stump. The room is instantly filled with the hiss of steam and the acrid, unmistakable smell of burning flesh. It is a moment of supreme violence, yet it is the act that saves the life. The heat seals the blood vessels instantly, fusing the tissue into a black, protective crust. The bleeding stops. The patient, often having fainted from the initial shock, is spared the visual horror of this final step, though the smell will linger in their hair and clothes for days. The barber wipes his hands on a rag, his face slick with sweat. He has done his job. He applies a dressing of linen, perhaps salved with egg whites or wine, and binds the stump. The immediate danger has passed. He turns back to his other customers, perhaps making a wry joke to break the tension. After all, he offers a discount if you get a shave while you're bleeding out. Though few take him up on it, the shop settles back into its rhythm. The razor scrapes against a stubbled chin. The door opens, letting in the sounds of the street and a breath of fresh air to mix with the heavy copper scent of the room. There is a raw, brutal honesty to the barber-surgeon's trade. He offers no magic spells, no lofty theories about the alignment of Mars. He offers only steel and fire, pain exchanged for survival. It is a transaction as old as warfare, a gamble where the stakes are absolute. As the patient is carried out, pale and unconscious but alive, we see the fragility of the medieval body, a thing that can be broken and burned, yet possesses a stubborn, miraculous will to endure. The barber watches him go, then turns to sharpen his blade on a leather strop. The steel sings a high, thin note, a lullaby for the limb that is lost, and a preparation for the next soul who will walk through the door, seeking the mercy of the knife. Leave the metallic tang of the barber's shop behind. Let the heavy door swing shut, muffling the rasp of the saw, and step back out into the winding cobblestone street. The air is cooler here, but as you walk a few paces down the lane, a new scent begins to tease the air. A complex, layered perfume that smells of earth, crushed petals, bitter roots, and distant, dusty spices. It draws you toward a shop with a window full of dried bundles and glass jars glinting in the afternoon sun. This is the domain of the apothecary, the keeper of the garden's secrets, and the master of the simples. If the physician is the architect of medicine, and the barber is the carpenter, the apothecary is the cook. Step inside, and you are immediately enveloped in a sensory library of nature. The ceiling is low, crisscrossed with heavy wooden beams, from which hang drying bunches of sage, rosemary, and lavender, their leaves brittle and gray-green, rustling softly like whispering ghosts whenever the door opens. The walls are lined with wooden drawers and shelves packed with ceramic jars, each labeled in fading ink with mysterious Latin names. There is a quiet rhythm here, the steady clack-clack grind of a heavy stone pestle crushing seeds in a mortar, a sound that feels like the heartbeat of the trade. The medieval worldview saw nature not as a chaotic wilderness, but as a book written by God, filled with hidden messages for those who knew how to read them. This belief was known as the doctrine of signatures. It was a beautiful, poetic, and entirely unscientific idea that suggested a plant's physical appearance was a clue to its medical use. Consider the walnut, a hard shell protecting a wrinkled, two-lobed nut that looks remarkably like a human brain. Therefore, the apothecary reasoned, Walnuts must be the cure for headaches and madness. Lungwort, with its spotted leaves resembling diseased lung tissue, was boiled into syrups for coughs. Eyebright, a small flower with markings that looked like a bloodshot eye, was used to treat infections of the vision. It was a system of logic based on visual rhymes, a belief that the Creator had left post-it notes on the flora to help humanity survive. While many of these remedies were useless, the comfort they provided was real. There was a reassuring order to a world where the cure looked like the complaint. But the apothecary's shelf is not just a collection of metaphors. It is a minefield of genuine chemical power. Tucked away in a jar marked Salix is the bark of the white willow tree. When a customer comes in complaining of aching joints or a fever that won't break, the apothecary might scrape some of this bark into a powder. It tastes bitter, like biting into a damp stick. But it works. We know now that it contains salicin, the chemical ancestor of modern aspirin. Here, amidst the superstition, is a nugget of pharmacological gold. Similarly, the jar of sticky golden honey is not just for sweetening tea. It is smeared onto wounds. Its natural antibacterial properties can stifle infection. A sweet mercy in a time of rot. However, for every willow bark, there is a mandrake. This root is the celebrity of the medieval garden, steeped in folklore, so thick you could cut it with a knife. The root is often forked, looking eerily like a little naked man. The legends say that when pulled from the earth, the mandrake screams, a sound so piercing it can kill a man. To harvest it safely, stories claim one must tie a hungry dog to the plant and throw a piece of meat just out of reach, covering one's ears, while the dog pulls the root free and takes the fatal curse. Historians have long noted that this myth was likely propagated by apothecaries themselves, a clever bit of marketing to drive up the price and keep amateur gardeners from stealing their stock. In reality, mandrake belongs to the nightshade family. It is a powerful narcotic and hallucinogen. Used carefully, it could induce a sleep deep enough for surgery. Used recklessly, it induced a sleep that lasted forever. Then there is the theriac, the grand mystery of the medieval pharmacy. It sits in a special ornate jar, often behind the counter. Theriac was the universal antidote, a cure-all with a recipe tracing back to King Mithridates of ancient Pontus. It was a chaotic slurry of over 60 ingredients: roasted viper flesh, opium, cinnamon, myrrh, agaric, and gum arabic, all fermented in honey and wine for years. It was sticky, black, and tasted, one imagines, like the bottom of a swamp. Yet it was the gold standard of medicine, consumed by kings and popes to ward off poison and plague. Did it work? Well, the opium certainly made the patient feel less concerned about dying, which counts for something. The apothecary himself is a figure of quiet authority. He stands behind his counter, hands stained green and yellow from handling turmeric and verdigris. He weighs his ingredients on a small brass balance, adding a pinch of this and a dram of that with the precision of a jeweler. He is a merchant of hope, selling tiny packets of powder that promise to drive away the demons of sickness. But he is also a businessman. He knows that while the local herbs, the simples, are good for the poor, the real money lies in the compounds made from exotic spices brought by Venetian ships from the mysterious East. Nutmeg, cloves, and ginger are worth more than their weight in silver, not just for their flavor, but because their intense heat is thought to boil away the cold humors of phlegm. To be sick and rich meant swallowing dissolved pearls and gold leaf. To be sick and poor meant drinking a tea of nettles and praying for the best. Behind the shop lies the physic garden, a walled enclosure that breathes in the twilight. It is a beautiful, deceptive place. Here, the foxglove grows tall with its purple bells, a plant that can restart a stopped heart or stop a beating one depending on the dose. Beside it grows the poppy, the giver of sleep, its milky sap the only true relief for the agony of the stone or the gout. The air here is heavy and still, filled with the buzzing of bees who care nothing for the difference between a poison and a cure. The apothecary walks these rows in the evening, gathering the leaves while the dew is still fresh, believing that the phase of the moon affects the potency of the sap. He is a man walking the knife edge of toxicology, often testing his brews on himself, his constitution hardened by years of sampling small doses of death. There is a gentle irony in the apothecary's trade. He is often looked down upon by the university-educated physician, who sees him as a mere grocer of herbs. Yet it is the apothecary who the people trust. He does not speak in high Latin. He speaks in the language of roots and flowers. He gives you something you can hold, smell, and taste. When the world feels out of control, there is a profound comfort in watching him grind dried leaves into a fine powder, packaging it in a small paper twist. It feels like magic. It feels like control. As night falls over the town, the apothecary locks his heavy oak door. The smells of the shop are sealed inside: the musk, the mint, the rot, and the sweetness. He retires to his back room, perhaps to mix a draught for his own aching back, knowing that for all his jars and powders, he is just as vulnerable as the customers he serves. The garden outside continues to grow in the dark, the roots stretching deep into the cool earth, indifferent to the theories of men, silently manufacturing the chemicals that will save or end lives when the sun rises again. The plants do not know they are medicines. They only know they are alive. And in this quiet, vegetative persistence, there is a strange, enduring peace. The dawn light creeps through the leaded panes of the physician's window, washing the room in a pale, milky gray. The candles from the night before have burned down to waxy stumps, and the air is still and cool. In this morning silence, the physician prepares for the most iconic ritual of medieval medicine, a ceremony so central to his identity that it is depicted in almost every manuscript and carving of the era. He is not reaching for a stethoscope, nor a thermometer, nor a scalpel. He is reaching for the matala. This object is a round-bottomed glass flask, shaped deliberately like a human bladder, woven into a wicker basket to keep it upright. It is the vessel of truth, the crystal ball of the body. In a time when touching a patient was often deemed undignified or unnecessary for a man of high learning, the matala allowed the physician to peer into the inner workings of the human machine without ever leaving his chair. This is the art of uroscopy, the water casting. And it is the primary lens through which the medieval world views disease. A servant enters, carrying a flask filled with amber liquid. The room goes quiet. The physician takes the glass by its long neck, lifting it carefully, almost reverently, toward the window. The light catches the fluid, illuminating it from within, turning the dull contents into a glowing lantern of gold, straw, or russet. To the modern observer, this might look like a guessing game, but to the medieval doctor, it is a rigorous science. He believes that urine is the filtration of the blood, a byproduct of the digestive cooking process that occurs in the liver. Just as a brewer judges the quality of ale by its clarity and froth, so too does the physician judge the humors of the patient by the waste they produce. He turns the flask slowly, squinting against the light. He is looking for specific signs outlined in the rota urinaria, or the urine wheel, a ubiquitous diagram found in nearly every medical text of the Middle Ages. Imagine a color wheel, but instead of paint swatches, it displays 20 distinct shades of urine, ranging from clear as well water to bright gold, lion's tawny, red as wine, and finally, ominously, black as mortified blood. Each shade tells a story. A pale, watery sample suggests a cold temperament, a failure of digestion, or a weakness of the spirit. A bright, fiery red indicates an excess of blood, a fever raging like a furnace within the veins, demanding immediate bloodletting to cool the system. Black urine is the herald of death, a sign that the melancholic humor has turned corrupt and the body is shutting down. But color is only the first chapter of the story. The physician looks closer, examining the consistency. Is it thin and watery, or thick and oily? He looks for the crown, the ring of bubbles that forms at the top of the liquid. Do the bubbles linger, suggesting a sticky, viscous humor, or do they pop instantly? He searches for clouds, suspensions, and sediments floating in the middle or settling at the bottom. These floating particles are red, like tea leaves. A cloud near the top might indicate an illness in the head, a sediment at the bottom, a problem in the kidneys or bladder. It is a system of visual metaphors, where the flask represents the body in miniature. The top is the head, the bottom the feet, and the contents the turbulent weather of the soul. Historians still debate how much of this was genuine observation and how much was performative theater. Certainly, some correlations were accurate: dark urine signals, dehydration; bloody urine signals, infection or stones. But the specificity with which medieval texts linked visual cues to complex internal diseases was largely a fantasy of order. Yet, the physician believes. He taps the glass with a fingernail, listening to the ping, staring into the suspension, as if he can see the patient's future swirling in the dregs. And then, there are the other senses. In a practice that makes the modern stomach turn, the physician does not rely on sight alone. He uncorks the flask and wafts the air toward his nose. The smell is categorized with the same rigor as the color: sweet, fetid, sour, or heavy. A sweet smell, like rotting apples, is a deadly sign, what we now know as the ketoacidosis of uncontrolled diabetes, though to him, it is just another imbalance. And in rare, brave, or perhaps desperate moments, the physician might dip a finger into the flask and taste it. It is a level of intimacy with the patient's biology that defies the sterile boundaries of today, a literal consuming of the illness to understand it. If the urine tastes of honey, the diagnosis is grave. The body is melting into sugar water. This practice of uroscopy became so popular that it eventually detached itself from the patient entirely. People began sending flasks of urine to doctors by messenger, sometimes traveling miles across the countryside. The physician would diagnose a man he had never met, simply by gazing at a bottle of his fluids delivered by a servant. This led to the rise of the piss prophets, medical diviners who claimed they could determine not just illness, but pregnancy. the sex of an unborn child, or even the patient's chastity, all from a glance at the glass. It became a symbol of medical authority so potent that the matula became the emblem of the profession. St. Cosmas, the patron saint of doctors, is almost always depicted holding one up to the heavens. There is a soft, human comedy to be found here amidst the gravity. Stories abound of skeptical patients trying to trick the doctors. A classic medieval prank involved a patient sending a flask of cow's urine or a mixture of wine and herbs to see if the physician could tell the difference. The clever doctor, realizing the ruse, perhaps by the smell or the impossible color, would turn the tables, diagnosing the patient with an excess of hay in their diet or prescribing a medicine fit for a bovine. It was a battle of wits played out through glass and fluid, a reminder that skepticism is not a modern invention. But for the most part, the mood in the study is one of solemnity. The physician sets the flask down on his heavy oak desk, the circle of condensation marking the wood. He dips his quill into the inkwell. The diagnosis is made. The liquid has spoken. He writes a prescription for a purgative, a bloodletting, or a change in diet, confident that the secrets of the inner body have been revealed by the light passing through the glass. The patient, waiting in the hall or lying in a bed miles away, hangs on this verdict. They trust the glass because they must. In a world where the interior of the body is a dark, terrifying cavern that can only be opened by a knife, the clear, bright transparency of the matula offers a comforting illusion of visibility. As the morning sun climbs higher, the light in the room shifts, and the golden glow of the flask fades. The physician wipes his hands on a linen cloth. He has read the map of the waters. He has navigated the strange, fluid geography of his patient's life without ever leaving his room. The flask is taken away to be washed, the secrets poured out into the gutter, returning to the earth. The mystery remains, but for a moment, it felt like knowledge, and in the medieval mind, the feeling of knowing, the sensation that the chaos of the body can be named, categorized, and understood, is a medicine all its own, perhaps the most potent one available. The physician turns from the window, leaving the amber glow of the urine flask behind, and steps out onto the narrow stone balcony that overlooks the sleeping town. The air here is sharp and cold, a stark contrast to the stuffy warmth of the study. Above him, the sky is a sprawling canvas of velvet darkness, pierced by the hard, diamond-bright light of 1,000 stars. In the modern world, we look up at the night sky and see burning balls of gas billions of miles away, suspended in a vacuum of indifference. But the medieval physician sees something entirely different. He sees a ceiling of moving crystal spheres, a clockwork mechanism of divine intelligence, and most importantly, he sees a map of the human body written in light. To understand medieval medicine, one must understand that there was no separation between the earth and the heavens. The concept was simple and absolute. As above, so below. The human body was viewed as a microcosm, a little world, that perfectly reflected the macrocosm of the universe. Just as the moon pulls the tides of the ocean, dragging the great waters back and forth across the sand, so too does it pull the humors within the veins of man. The physician leans against the cold stone railing, his eyes tracing the familiar constellations. He is not merely stargazing, he is reading a diagnostic chart. Back inside, spread across his desk, is a parchment that illustrates this connection with graphic literalism. It is known as the Zodiac Man. In this drawing, a human figure is dissected not by a knife, but by the 12 signs of the zodiac. A ram, Aries, sits atop the head, claiming dominion over the skull, eyes, and brain. A bull, Taurus, curls around the neck and throat. The twins of Gemini embrace the shoulders and arms. Further down, the crab of Cancer guards the chest and stomach, while the lion of Leo rules the heart. It continues all the way to the feet, where two fish, Pisces, swim in opposite directions. This is not a metaphor. To the medieval mind, this is biological law. This celestial anatomy dictates every move the surgeon makes. Imagine a patient arrives with a swollen, throbbing abscess on his neck that needs to be lanced. The barber surgeon, knife in hand, looks to the physician. The physician consults his almanac, a book of tables as complex as any modern tax code, and shakes his head. The moon is currently in Taurus. To cut into the neck while the constellation that rules the neck is dominant would be madness. The moon's presence amplifies the power of that region, meaning the blood would flow too freely, uncontrollable, and fatal. The surgery must wait. The patient, in agony, must endure until the moon moves into Gemini or Cancer. It is a terrifying game of cosmic timing where pain must sit patiently in the waiting room until the stars agree to see it. The planets, too, are players in this medical drama. They are not just wandering lights. They are personalities with distinct tempers that infect the world below. The physician locates the red wanderer, Mars, glowing angrily in the southern sky. Mars is the planet of iron, fire, and war. When it is high in the sky or in a dominant alignment, it causes fevers to spike, tempers to flare, and wounds to fester. It is the patron star of surgeons, yet also their enemy. A surgery performed under a hostile Mars is doomed to end in hemorrhage. Conversely, the physician looks for Saturn, the slow, dim wanderer. Saturn is cold, dry, and melancholic. It rules the bones, the memory, and the slow, wasting diseases of old age. A patient falling ill under the influence of Saturn faces a long, lingering recovery, their vitality drained by the planet's icy stare. There is a profound sense of helplessness in this worldview, but also a strange sort of comfort. It means that your illness is not random. It is not a meaningless accident of nature. It is part of the great turning wheel of the cosmos. If you have a fever, it is because Mars is touching your life. If you are depressed, it is because Saturn is weighing on your heart. You are woven into the fabric of the universe. Historians still argue whether this astrological determinism stifled medical progress by discouraging experimentation. After all, why try a new cure if the stars say the patient is doomed? Or if it actually provided a rigorous framework that encouraged doctors to observe nature more closely? It required them to be mathematicians and astronomers, elevating medicine from a trade of butchery to a science of the spheres. Soft humor can be found in the sheer logistical nightmare this created for the sick. Imagine getting a toothache on a Tuesday, only to be told by a solemn doctor that Tuesday is ruled by Mars, and pulling a tooth today would be an invitation to disaster. You must wait until Friday, the day of Venus, when things are softer and kinder. It turns medical care into a negotiation with the calendar, where a patient might plead with the doctor to check his charts just one more time to see if perhaps Jupiter might offer a loophole. The physician returns to his desk and picks up his quill, He is casting a decumbiture chart, a horoscope calculated not for a birth, but for the moment a patient fell ill. He marks the position of the moon, the ascendant sign, and the placement of the Lord of Death, usually the planet ruling the 8th house. It is a grim piece of accounting. If the moon is applying a square aspect to Saturn, the prognosis is poor. If it is trining Jupiter, the great benefic, the patient will likely recover. He writes these findings down with a steady hand, believing that he is calculating the will of God as revealed through the geometry of the heavens. This reliance on the stars also explains the seasonal rhythm of medieval health. There were the dog days of late summer, when the star Sirius rose with the sun. This was considered the most dangerous time of year, a period of intense heat when the humors boiled and the air was thick with pestilence. Physicians would flee the cities, and bloodletting was strictly forbidden, as the body was thought to be too weak to withstand the loss. Conversely, spring was the season of blood, a time for purging and renewal. The medical year breathed in and out with the seasons, a slow rhythmic cycle that mirrored the crops in the fields. As the night deepens, the physician rubs his tired eyes. The calculations are exhausting. He is trying to impose order on a chaotic world, trying to predict the unpredictable twists of fate by pinning them to the reliable movements of the planets. Outside, the great wheel continues to turn, indifferent to the suffering in the beds below. The moon creeps from one house to another, silently shifting the odds of life and death for thousands of sleeping souls. The wind picks up, rattling the shutters, a reminder that, while the stars may be perfect and eternal, the earth is messy, changeable, and cold. The physician blows out his candle, plunging the room into darkness. He has done his work. He has consulted the map of the sky. Now he must rest, for tomorrow brings a different kind of labor. While the stars guide the theory, the ingredients for the cure must be pulled from the mud of the earth. The celestial chart fades from his mind, replaced by the earthy, damp reality of the dawn that is approaching. He will trade his telescope for a pair of muddy boots, descending from the high, clean air of the balcony to the low, wet grounds where life crawls and slithers. The stars may dictate the timing, but the swamp provides the tools. The descent from the pristine mathematical perfection of the stars is steep and sudden. We leave the physician's balcony, where the air is crisp and the logic is celestial, and plunge downward, past the cobblestone streets, past the city walls, and into the murky, desolate borderlands that fringe the medieval world. Here, the ground turns soft and treacherous. The air grows heavy with the smell of wet earth, decaying reeds, and stagnant water. The silence is different here. It is not the reverent hush of a library, but the teeming, wet silence of a fen, broken only by the croak of a hidden frog or the sudden splash of a water vole. We have arrived in the swamp, the office of the most unlikely and vital worker in the medieval medical economy, the leech collector. It is dawn, but the sun is nothing more than a pale bruise behind a curtain of grey mist. A figure moves slowly through the reeds, wading knee-deep in the dark, chilly water. It is likely a woman, her skirts hiked up and bundled around her waist, or perhaps an old man too worn for the plough. They are the gatherers, the bottom rung of the healing ladder. Yet without them, the great physicians of Paris and Bologna would be powerless. They do not carry nets or traps. They require no bait, for they are the bait. The collector stops and stands perfectly still, disturbing the water just enough to mimic the movement of cattle. She waits. Beneath the surface, in the gloom of the peat-stained water, sensing the vibration and the warmth of blood, a creature uncoils. It is Hirudo medicinalis, the medicinal leech. It swims with a ribbon-like grace, undulating through the murk until it finds the collector's bare leg. There is a faint sensation, a tiny tickle against the skin, and then the latch. The collector does not flinch. She is used to this. She waits for a few more to attach, 3, 4, perhaps half a dozen, before she wades back to the muddy bank to pluck them off. To the modern mind, the leech is a creature of horror, a slimy parasite synonymous with exploitation. But to the medieval world, the leech is a miracle of engineering, a living syringe sent by God to gently draw out the poisons of the body. Unlike the barber's terrifying knife, which hacks and scars, the leech is precise. It is the tool of choice for the delicate places, the gums, the lips, the eyelids, the hemorrhoids. When a lady of the court faints from excess blood, or a child has a fever that needs cooling, one does not call for the saw. One calls for the worm. Let us look closely at this creature as the collector drops it into a basket lined with damp moss. It is an olive green ribbon, patterned with stripes of orange and black. It possesses 3 jaws arranged in a Mercedes-Benz star shape, housing hundreds of microscopic teeth. When it bites, it does not tear, it saws. But the true genius of the leech lies in its saliva. As it bites, it injects a complex cocktail of chemicals. First, a local anesthetic, so the host feels no pain, a mercy the barber surgeon cannot offer. Second, a vasodilator to widen the veins. And third, iridin, a powerful anticoagulant that prevents the blood from clotting. This ensures a free flow of the humor, allowing the leech to feed until it is swollen to 5 times its original size. A bloated, glossy berry of blood. The collector examines her catch with a critical eye. Not all leeches are created equal. The horse leech, a larger, more aggressive cousin, is useless for medicine. Its bite is too deep, its hunger too voracious. She needs the true medicinal leech, the picky eater of the swamp. There is a strange, dark humor in the trade. The leech collectors often suffer from dizziness and anemia, literally drained by their profession, while the leeches they sell live like kings, kept in jars of fresh water and fed on the finest blood of the aristocracy. It is a symbiotic economy where the poor bleed to catch the leeches and the leeches bleed the rich to cure them. Once the basket is full, the collector begins the long trek back to town. She will sell her catch to the apothecary or the barber surgeon for a few pennies. These creatures are a valuable commodity. In fact, historians note that the demand for leeches was so high that by the later centuries, Hirudo medicinalis was hunted to near extinction in England and France, leading to a massive import market where millions of leeches were shipped in damp sacks across Europe. It was a trade route of parasites, a global network built on the hunger of a worm. Back in the surgery, the application of the leech is an art form in itself. The barber cannot simply throw the creature at the patient and hope for the best. Leeches are temperamental. They do not like skin that smells of sweat, perfume, or old garlic. The patient must be washed, often with sweetened milk or blood, to entice the creature to bite. If the leech is stubborn, the barber might prick the patient's skin with a needle to offer a literal appetizer. To guide the leech to a specific spot, say a precise point behind the ear to treat vertigo, the barber uses a narrow glass tube or a quill, sliding the leech down the tunnel until its mouth meets the skin. Once attached, the room settles into a quiet, waiting game. The patient watches with a mix of revulsion and hope as the creature pulses, growing darker and larger. There is no pain, only a strange, rhythmic tugging sensation. The physician nods approvingly. He believes the leech is sucking out the corrupted blood, the stagnant mire that has caused the illness. In reality, the leech is removing a significant amount of fluid, but the true medical effect often comes from the bleeding that continues after the leech falls off. Because of the anticoagulants, the Y-shaped wound can weep for hours, purging the system far more effectively than a quick slash of a knife. When the leech is full, it simply lets go, rolling off the skin like a drunken guest leaving a banquet. If the barber needs to remove it early, perhaps the patient is fainting, he sprinkles a pinch of salt on the creature's back. The leech, in immediate distress, regurgitates its meal and attaches. It is a crude but effective off-switch. The used leeches are not discarded. They are valuable tools. They are made to vomit the blood by squeezing them or using vinegar, then placed back in their jars of water to rest and hunger again. They are the reusable needles of the medieval world. There is a fascinating scholarly debate about the efficacy of this practice. For centuries, modern medicine mocked leeching as the height of barbarism. Yet, in a twist of irony, the leech has returned to the modern hospital. Today, plastic surgeons use hirudo medicinalis to salvage reattached fingers and ears. When delicate veins are reconnected, blood can pool and kill the tissue. The leech, with its natural anticoagulants, drains this congestion and saves the limb. The medieval instinct was wrong in theory, balancing humors, but right in practice. Sometimes, the best way to heal is to bleed. But the collector in the swamp knows nothing of microsurgery or anticoagulants. She knows only the cold water, the mist, and the ache in her legs. She is the invisible foundation of the medical world, the gatherer of the raw material. She finishes her day as the sun finally burns through the fog, her basket heavy with writhing potential. She washes the mud from her shins, checking the small triangular scars that dot her skin like a constellation of her labor. She is tired, but there is satisfaction in the weight of the basket. Tonight, somewhere in a fine bed with velvet curtains, a lord will sleep soundly because of the creatures she pulled from the mire. The connection between the filth of the swamp and the health of the highborn is complete, bound together by the hunger of a simple, blind worm. Wash the mud from your feet and leave the cold, biting wind of the fen behind. We travel now to the heart of the city, to a massive stone structure that rises like a fortress against the misery of the streets. This is the Hôtel Dieu, the house of God. In the modern world, the word hospital conjures images of fluorescent lights, sterile white tiles, and the beep of monitors. But here, the hospital is a cathedral of suffering, a place where medicine and religion are woven so tightly together that they cannot be unraveled. It is a sanctuary of shadows, where the cure is secondary to the care, and where the salvation of the soul is considered far more urgent than the healing of the body. Step through the heavy wooden doors. The first thing that hits you is not the smell of antiseptic, but a thick, complex wave of sensory information. The air is warm, heated by great fireplaces and the bodies of 100 patients. It smells of beeswax candles, stale incense, boiling cabbage, and the unmistakable, sweet-sour odor of sickness. The room is a vast, high-ceilinged hall, resembling the nave of a church more than a medical ward. And in a way, it is a church. At the far end of the hall, visible from every bed, stands an altar where a priest celebrates Mass daily. The rhythmic chanting of Latin prayers provides a constant, murmuring soundtrack to the groans of the ill, a sonic reminder that God is the ultimate physician. The staff here are not nurses in scrubs, but sisters in habits and brothers in robes. They move silently between the rows of beds, their faces obscured by wimples or hoods. These men and women have taken vows of poverty and service, dedicating their lives to the curer's animarum, the care of souls. They are not trained in the science of galenicals or the geometry of surgery. Their medical knowledge is often limited to folk remedies and common sense. But what they lack in technical skill, they make up for in tireless, terrifying devotion. They wash the sores of lepers, feed the helpless, and hold the hands of the dying, believing that in the face of the sick poor, they are looking into the face of Christ himself. Walk down the central aisle. The scene is shocking to modern eyes. The beds are large, four-poster wooden structures draped with heavy curtains to keep out drafts. But look closely. There is rarely just one patient in a bed. In the crowded wards of a medieval hospital, privacy is a luxury unknown. 2, 3, or sometimes even 4 patients might share a single mattress, arranged head to toe like sardines in a tin. A man with a broken leg might lie next to a man with a fever. A woman with the flux might share blankets with a traveler who is simply exhausted and starving. It is a forced intimacy born of necessity and charity, a huddling together against the cold indifference of the world outside. This crowding creates a peculiar paradox. The hospital is intended as a place of refuge, a safety net for the vulnerable who have no family to care for them. It provides the basics of survival: a roof, warmth, and food. The sisters ladling out bowls of thick vegetable pottage and cups of weak ale are saving countless lives simply by preventing starvation and hypothermia. For a beggar used to sleeping in the rain, the Hôtel Dieu is a palace. Yet by packing the sick together in unventilated halls, sharing linens and cups, the hospital also becomes an accidental incubator of disease. A simple flu can sweep through the ward like wildfire. Historians and epidemiologists still debate the net impact of these institutions, whether they saved more people through shelter than they killed through cross-contamination. It is a grim calculus, but one the medieval mind did not make. To them, infection was not a microscopic invasion. It was the will of God or the result of bad air, and the act of charity was a good in itself, regardless of the outcome. The routine of the hospital is monastic. The day is divided not by rounds of medication, but by the ringing of bells for prayer. Upon admission, a patient's first prescription is often confession. The logic is sound within their worldview, since illness is often a physical manifestation of spiritual sin. Cleansing the conscience is the first step to cleansing the body. If the soul is heavy, how can the humors be light? So the priest is seen as often as the doctor. For the dying, this brings immense comfort, a guarantee of last rites and a proper burial in consecrated ground, a final dignity that the streets would deny them. There is a gentle human softness here amidst the suffering. The nuns, though strict, often bend the rules for their charges. Records show orders for pittances, extra treats of meat, spiced wine, or white bread, given to the very sick to tempt their appetites. In some hospitals, there are gardens where patients strong enough to walk can sit in the sun, smelling the roses and herbs, a primitive form of therapy that recognizes the healing power of beauty. And despite the lack of antibiotics, there is a profound psychological medicine in simply being cared for. To be washed, fed, and prayed over in a world that is often brutal and short tells the patient that they matter, that they are not discarded. However, the medical care itself remains primitive. The sisters might apply a poultice of mustard and flour to a chest to draw out a cold, or bind a wound with linen soaked in wine. They are expert at making the sick comfortable, propping up pillows, cooling fevered brows with damp rags, whispering words of reassurance. But when the shadow of death draws close, they step back. They do not fight to prolong life at all costs with tubes and machines. They view death not as a failure of medicine, but as a transition, a final healing that releases the soul from the broken vessel of the body. The goal is a good death, peaceful and shriven, not a prolonged struggle. As evening falls, the great hall grows dim. The candles are extinguished one by one, leaving only the sanctuary lamp glowing red by the altar. The air cools, the sounds of the ward shift. The coughing seems louder in the dark, the murmurs of prayer more urgent. The sisters retire to their cells, leaving a few to keep the death watch, walking the aisles with a lantern to check for those who might slip away in the night. There is a haunting beauty to the medieval hospital. It is a testament to the belief that even in the depths of squalor and sickness, there is dignity. It is a place where society's unwanted, the poor, the lame, the orphans, are brought in from the cold and given a bed, a bowl of soup, and a name. It is imperfect, dangerous, and scientifically blind, yet it is lit by the warm, unwavering flame of compassion. The stone walls absorb the cries of centuries, holding them in a silent embrace. But even these thick walls cannot keep everything out. While the hospital offers sanctuary from the cold and hunger, it cannot seal its windows against the very air itself. And in the medieval mind, the air is not just empty space. It is a carrier, a medium for something far more terrifying than the cold. As the patients sleep, breathing in the shared atmosphere of the ward, the wind outside shifts, carrying with it a scent that will change the course of history. The sanctuary is strong, but the invisible enemy gathering on the breeze pays no heed to stone or prayer. The next chapter of our story floats on the wind, silent, odorless, and deadly. Step out of the heavy stone embrace of the hospital and into the open street. You might expect relief, a breath of fresh air after the stifling confinement of the ward. But in the medieval city, the air is not a neutral element, it is a battlefield. You stand in the narrow alleyway, and instinctively, you raise a hand to cover your nose and mouth. The fog that clings to the cobblestones is thick and yellow-gray, swirling around your ankles like a living thing. It carries a scent so overpowering, so complex in its foulness, that it feels physical, a heavy, cloying blanket of sewage, rotting offal, stagnant mud, and the unwashed press of humanity. To us, a bad smell is a nuisance, a temporary discomfort to be wrinkled at and walked past. But to the medieval citizen, a bad smell is a weapon. This is the age of the miasma theory, the prevailing medical doctrine that held sway for centuries. The word comes from the ancient Greek for pollution or stain. The idea was terrifyingly simple. Disease is not caused by tiny organisms you cannot see. It is caused by the air itself. When organic matter rots, be it a pile of fish guts in the market, a dead dog in the gutter, or the vapor rising from a swamp, it corrupts the atmosphere. The air becomes miasmatic, charged with poisonous particles that enter the body through the breath and corrupt the humors instantly. To smell the rot is to be infected by it. This belief transforms the act of breathing into a game of Russian roulette. Every inhalation is a risk. Fear hangs in the atmosphere, heavier than the fog. If you walk past a heap of refuse and catch the scent of decay, you might panic, believing you have just inhaled a fever. This explains the layout of the medieval city in ways we often overlook. The wealthy do not just build big houses. They build them up, and they build them on hills, desperate to rise above the heavy, sinking clouds of bad air that plague the poor in the low-lying river districts. Real estate is priced by the quality of the wind. But since one cannot stop breathing, one must fight air with air. If a foul smell causes sickness, then surely a sweet smell must prevent it. This logic gives rise to a world of olfactory armor. As you walk through the crowd, you notice that people are not just walking. They are clutching things to their faces. A woman passes by, holding a small bouquet of dried flowers and herbs pressed tight against her nose. This is the nosegay, or tassimasi. It is not a fashion statement. It is a gas mask. It is a bundle of lavender, rosemary, thyme, and sage, a fragrant shield raised against the invisible demons of the street. For the wealthy, this protection is elevated to an art form. A nobleman walks past, dressed in velvet. He holds a metal sphere, intricately carved and swinging from a chain on his belt. This is a pomander, from the French pomme d'ambre, or apple of amber. The sphere is hinged. It opens to reveal a sponge soaked in vinegar, or a ball of paste made from ambergris, musk, cloves, and cinnamon. It is a piece of jewelry that doubles as a life support system. Throughout the day, whenever the wind shifts or he passes a butcher shop, he lifts the sphere to his nose, inhaling deeply, believing that the expensive spices are scrubbing the air clean before it reaches his lungs. There is a desperate, touching ingenuity to these efforts. The floor of a well-to-do home is not just swept, it is strewn with strewing herbs. Meadowsweet, chamomile, and mint are scattered across the floorboards so that every footstep releases a burst of protective fragrance. To enter a house is to crush a garden underfoot. During times of plague or sickness, great bonfires are lit at street corners, fed with aromatic woods like pine and cedar. The city becomes a smoking censer, a hazy attempt to fumigate the sky itself. The smoke burns the eyes and scratches the throat, but the people breathe it in gratefully, trusting the fire to purify the poison. Historians still argue whether this obsession with miasma helped or hindered the fight against disease. On one hand, it led to the first stirrings of public sanitation. City councils, terrified of the corrupted air, passed laws demanding that butchers dump their waste downstream and that cesspits be cleaned regularly. The gong farmers, brave souls who shoveled human waste from privies at night, were the unsung heroes of public health, removing the source of the smell and inadvertently the source of the bacteria. On the other hand, the focus on air distracted from the real vectors, while people were busy sniffing lemons and burning frankincense to ward off the smell of a neighbor's trash. The rats and fleas, the true carriers of the plague, scurried unnoticed across their shoes. They were fighting the shadow, while the monster stood right in front of them. There is also a soft, dark humor to be found in the specific recipes for protection. Some physicians advised sniffing a latrine in the morning on the theory that like cures like, or that acclimating the nose to a bad smell would immunize the body against others. It was a bold strategy, though one imagines it made for a lonely social life. Others recommended keeping a goat in the house, believing the animal's pungent musk would overpower any wandering miasmas. If you survived the plague, it might just be because no one wanted to come near your goat-scented living room. But beneath the herbs and the spices, there is a profound anxiety. The miasma theory made the world feel permeable and unsafe. You could not lock your doors against the air. It seeped through the cracks. It came down the chimney. It drifted in from the marshes. It turned the environment into a hostile force. A sudden change in wind direction could cause a village to hold its breath in collective terror. The fog was not just weather, it was a predator. As the sun begins to set, the smells of the city change. The sharp tang of wood smoke rises, mingling with the roasting of meat and the damp coolness of the river. The bad air of the day settles into the low places. You see a mother tucking her children into bed, closing the wooden shutters tight, stuffing rags into the gaps to keep the night air out. She hangs a bundle of dried sage above the crib, a silent sentinel in the dark. It is a gesture of love and fear, a hope that the scent of the garden will be enough to keep the sickness at bay. The belief in miasma was wrong, tragically so. The scent of a rose cannot kill a bacterium. But in a world without microscopes, it provided a sense of agency. It gave people something to do. They could gather flowers, they could carry spices, they could sweeten their world in the face of rot. It was a sensory rebellion against death, a declaration that beauty and fragrance could hold the line against decay. As we leave the city streets, the air grows cleaner, sharper. The heavy, cloying scent of the urban center fades, replaced by the smell of crushed grass and overturned earth. We are moving away from the civilians, hiding behind their posies, and toward a place where the air is filled with a different kind of scent, the copper tang of blood and the burning of torches. The bad air here is not a mystery. It is the aftermath of violence. We are heading to the battlefield, where the theories of the physician meet the brutal reality of the sword, and where the cure is often as sharp as the wound. The scent of lavender and the protective superstition of the city fade behind us. The road grows rougher, churning into deep ruts of mud under the wheels of heavy wagons. We are moving towards the edge of the map, to a place where the theories of the university and the prayers of the monastery are drowned out by the clash of steel. Welcome to the battlefield, the grim laboratory of medieval medicine. Here, the bad air is not a miasma of sewage, but the acrid smoke of campfires, the metallic tang of spilled blood, and the smell of wet wool drying on exhausted men. It is a place of ruin, yet ironically, it is also the cradle of surgical progress. Step into the surgeon's tent. It is a canvas shelter flapping violently in the wind, illuminated by flickering torches that cast long, dancing shadows against the fabric. The ground is trampled earth, slick with fluids. The man in charge here is not a robed academic. He is a field surgeon, a man whose armor is a leather apron stiff with dried gore. He looks more like a butcher than a healer, and in the eyes of many, the distinction is negligible. But watch his hands. They are steady, fast, and surprisingly gentle as he examines a soldier lying on a wooden trestle table. The soldier has an arrow embedded in his thigh. It is a bodkin point, a nasty thin needle of iron designed to punch through mail armor. In the quiet of a library, a physician might consult a diagram. Here, the surgeon reaches for a tool that looks like something from a torture chamber, the arrow spoon. It is a pair of concave metal blades designed to slide into the wound, surround the barbed head of the arrow, and shield the flesh as it is pulled out. It is a brutal piece of engineering, but it saves the leg from being torn to shreds during extraction. The soldier grips the edge of the table, his knuckles white, a piece of leather clamped between his teeth to keep him from biting through his tongue. There is no time for astrology here. The surgeon does not check if Mars is in retrograde. He works with the urgency of a mechanic trying to fix an engine while the race is still running. Once the iron is out, the wound gapes open, a red mouth screaming for attention. Now comes the defining conflict of medieval trauma care, the battle between the dry and the wet. For centuries, the prevailing wisdom, passed down from Garland and upheld by the church, was that a wound could not heal unless it produced laudable pus bonum et laudabile. This thick, creamy white discharge was seen as a sign that the body was cooking out the corruption, turning the bad humors into a harmless fluid. To encourage this, surgeons would deliberately poke wounds with irritating substances to provoke infection, believing they were helping the process. It was a tragic, backwards logic that likely killed thousands who might have otherwise recovered. But look at what this surgeon is doing. He is ignoring the textbooks. He reaches for a jar of golden, viscous liquid, honey. He pours it directly into the raw, bleeding cavity. It seems counterintuitive, pouring food into a wound. But honey is one of the few true miracles in the medieval kit. It is hyperosmotic. It draws water out of bacteria, essentially dehydrating them to death. It creates a sticky barrier against the dirt of the camp, and unlike the caustic lime or arsenic pastes often used, it is soothing. When the honey touches the raw nerve endings, the soldier's breathing hitches, not in pain, but in the shock of the cool sweetness meeting the burning heat of the injury. Historians still argue about how widespread this clean approach really was. While the great medical schools taught the necessity of pus, many field surgeons, figures like the Italian Theodoric Borgognoni, began to realize that wounds washed with wine and sealed with clean linen healed faster and cleaner. They were voices crying out in the wilderness, often mocked by the establishment for their simple methods. Yet, on the battlefield, results matter more than dogma. If the honey works, the surgeon uses it. If the bleeding will not stop, the surgeon turns to his other companion, fire. The cautery irons are heating in a brazier of charcoal near the tent flap. We have seen them before in the barber's shop, but here they are larger, heavier. The smell of the hot iron is terrifying, a dry metallic heat that pricks the nose. The application is swift, a hiss, a cloud of steam, and the smell of searing meat that makes the stomach turn. It is the ultimate paradox of the era. To save the flesh, one must burn it. The soldier passes out from the pain, a mercy that the surgeon likely welcomes, for a limp patient is easier to work on than a thrashing one. Amidst this horror, there is a grim, resilient humor. The soldiers waiting their turn crack jokes to keep the fear at bay. One might gesture to his mangled hand and say, "Well, at least I won't have to row the galley anymore." Another, watching the surgeon sharpen his knife, might ask if there's a discount for leaving half the leg behind. It is a dark comedy, a psychological shield as important as the wooden ones they carry into battle. It bonds them together, transforming their individual suffering into a shared, bearable burden. The surgeon wipes his hands on a rag. He is exhausted. He has removed 3 arrows, amputated a foot, and sewn up a slash across a chest using a needle and thread that would look coarse to a sailmaker. He is not a rich man. He is often paid in loot scrounged from the dead or in promises that may never be kept. Yet, there is a nobility in his grime. He is the first line of defense against the Great Reaper. He knows nothing of bacteria, yet he boils his tools because he has noticed that clean fire seems to prevent the bad rot. He is practicing antiseptic surgery without the theory, guided only by observation and the desperate need to keep his men alive. As the night deepens, the battlefield quiets, save for the low moans of the wounded and the crackle of the watchfires. The surgeon sits on a stool, staring at his blood-stained hands. He takes a drink of sour wine, not for pleasure, but to numb his own mind against the sights of the day. In his bag, he carries a scroll, perhaps a copy of the famous Wound Man diagram, a grotesque illustration of a man stabbed, shot, and clubbed in every conceivable way, a cheat sheet for trauma. It is his Bible of breakage. The honey in the jar catches the firelight, glowing like liquid amber. It is a strange juxtaposition, the iron that kills and the honey that heals. One comes from the forge, cold and hard, the other from the garden, warm and sweet. In this tent, they meet within the fragile vessel of the human body. The soldier on the table breathes shallowly, his leg bound in linen, the sweet scent of the hive mingling with the iron scent of his own blood. He has survived the battle. Now he must survive the cure. The wind picks up, rattling the tent poles. The surgeon closes his eyes for a moment, listening to the rhythm of the breathing around him. He does not know that centuries from now, scientists will prove him right about the honey and wrong about the pus. He only knows that tonight, the bleeding has stopped. And in this dark, violent world, that is the only victory that counts. But not all healing happens in the chaos of the camp or the rigidity of the university. Far away from the shouting of captains and the scratching of quills, there is another kind of medicine being practiced. It is quiet, domestic, and deeply misunderstood. It is hidden in the cottages of the countryside, passed down in whispers from mother to daughter. As the fires of the war camp fade into the distance, we turn our gaze towards the village edge, where a different kind of fire burns in a hearth, and a different kind of healer tends to the needs of the common folk. The heavy iron and smoke of the battlefield fade into the distance, replaced by the soft, rhythmic creaking of a rocking chair and the crackle of a small domestic fire. We have left the world of men, the soldiers, the surgeons, the university doctors, and entered a space that history often forgets to record, yet without which the medieval world would have collapsed. We are in the cottage of the wise woman, the sage femme, the village healer. She is the invisible backbone of medieval health, the first person you call when a child has a fever or a cow stops giving milk, and the last person the history books usually thank. Her clinic is her kitchen. The air here is not filled with the stench of sickness, or the metallic tang of blood, but with the warm, yeasty smell of rising dough, the sharp scent of drying onions, and the earthy aroma of herbs hanging from the rafters. Unlike the physician's study, which is a place of theory and paper, this is a place of practice and touch. She does not own a single book. She cannot read the Latin of Galen or Hippocrates. Her library is stored in her memory, a vast, unwritten encyclopedia of roots, leaves, and symptoms passed down from her mother, who learned it from hers. It is a lineage of survival, whispered over bubbling pots for 1,000 years. The wise woman sits by the hearth, her hands busy. They are rough hands, stained with the juice of berries and the dirt of the garden, but they possess a dexterity that the barber surgeon lacks. She is mixing a pottage for a neighbor's cough. To the untrained eye, it looks like she is just making soup, and in a way, she is. Medieval folk medicine makes little distinction between food and drugs. A good broth of chicken, leeks, and garlic is seen as a powerful medicine, warming the body and chasing out the cold humors. She adds a handful of horehound and a spoonful of honey. She doesn't know about the expectorant properties of the herb or the antimicrobial nature of the honey. She just knows that when old Miller John took this last winter, he stopped wheezing. That is enough. There is a quiet, subversive power in this room. The university-trained physicians often dismiss these women as vetulae, old wives, mocking their remedies as superstition. Yet, when the physician's expensive theriac fails, or when his astrological charts offer no comfort, the people come knocking on her door. They trust her because she is one of them. She doesn't charge a gold florin. She accepts a basket of eggs, a length of wool, or simply the promise of a favor returned. Her medicine is woven into the fabric of the village economy, a barter of care that binds the community together. Watch her work with a patient, a young girl with a skin rash. The wise woman does not hold up a flask of urine to the light. She touches the skin. She asks about what the girl has eaten, how she sleeps, if she has been frightened lately. She treats the person, not the planet. She might prescribe an ointment made of goose grease and marigold. The goose grease is just a vehicle, a fatty base to hold the medicine, but the marigold, calendula, reduces inflammation. It works. The girl stops scratching. The village nods in approval. It is a victory for the kitchen over the classroom. But her practice is not just herbal. It is deeply spiritual. The line between prayer, magic, and medicine here is non-existent. As she stirs the pot, she mutters a rhythmic chant. To modern ears, it sounds like a spell. To her, it is a prayer, perhaps a corrupted version of a Latin psalm or a rhyme to help her time the cooking. 3 paternosters while the water boils, she might say. Is this magic? Or is it just a way to measure time before clocks were common? Historians still debate where the church drew the line. For centuries, the church tolerated these women, recognizing that they filled a gap the priests could not. As long as they attributed their cures to God and not the devil, they were left alone. But the ice is thin, and it is getting thinner. There is a soft humor in the way she deals with the men of the village. When a husband comes in, complaining of a deathly flux, that is clearly just a stomachache from eating too many green apples, she doesn't lecture him on gluttony. She gives him a tea of peppermint and chamomile, pats his hand, and tells him he's very brave. She knows that half of medicine is reassurance. She offers a placebo long before the word exists. A bread pill, a lucky stone, a ribbon tied around the wrist. If it calms the mind, it helps the body. She is a psychologist as much as a pharmacist, managing the anxieties of a superstitious world with a knowing smile. However, her knowledge extends into the shadows. She knows which mushrooms will make a man see God, and which will make him stop breathing. She knows the secrets of the moonflowers, hemlock, belladonna, henbane. These are the tools of the flying ointment, the salve that, when rubbed on the skin, or, as some rumors suggest, on the handle of a broomstick applied to mucous membranes, causes hallucinations of flying. She uses them sparingly, perhaps to help a woman through a difficult labor or to ease the passing of an elder. But this knowledge is dangerous. To know the cure is to know the poison. If a neighbor's child dies after taking a remedy, the grief can turn quickly to accusation. She poisoned him, they might whisper. She has the evil eye. So, the wise woman walks a tightrope between reverence and fear every day of her life. One of the most fascinating aspects of her trade is the girdle of St. Margaret. Childbirth is the most dangerous battlefield for women, and since male doctors are largely barred from the birthing room, the wise woman reigns supreme here. She might wrap a parchment scroll inscribed with prayers around the laboring mother's belly. Skeptics call it a charm. She calls it a lifeline. She brews raspberry leaf tea, which we now know tones the uterine muscles. She is a master of the lying in, the period of rest after birth, ensuring the new mother is fed and cared for. She is the guardian of the threshold between life and death. Scholars often point to the Trotula texts, a collection of treatises on women's medicine from the 12th century, attributed to a female physician named Trota of Salerno, as evidence that women did hold formal medical authority in some places. But for the vast majority of Europe, the wise woman is uncredentialed and unrecognized. She is the empiric, the one who learns by doing. While the male doctor debates whether a fever is caused by choler or blood, she is already sponging the patient's forehead with vinegar and water. She is pragmatic. She cares about what works, not why it works. As the evening draws in, the cottage grows cozy. The firelight dances on the bundles of dried herbs, making them look like sleeping bats. The wise woman sits back in her chair, wiping her hands on her apron. She is tired. She has delivered a baby, set a broken finger, and listened to the baker's wife complain about her mother-in-law. She is the glue of the village. She is not a saint, nor is she a witch. She is simply a neighbor with a talent for nurturing. She looks at the jar of dried toadstools on the shelf and the cross hanging above the door. In her mind, there is no contradiction. God made the toadstool, and God made the prayer. She uses both. She is a bridge between the pagan past of her ancestors and the Christian present of her rulers. But outside, the wind is changing. The universities are growing more powerful, demanding a monopoly on truth. The church is becoming more suspicious of unauthorized miracles. The day is coming when the smell of her herbs will be mistaken for the smell of sulfur, and the fire in her hearth will be replaced by a very different kind of fire in the town square. But not yet. Tonight, the village sleeps soundly because she is there. A child stops coughing. A fever breaks. A mother holds her newborn. The wise woman closes her eyes, her work done for the day. She does not need a degree to know that she has saved a life. She only needs the quiet rhythm of the breath in the darkness. And as she rests, our story shifts. We leave the humble, earthy warmth of the cottage and travel to a place of gold, velvet, and divine mystery. We are going to the very top of the social pyramid, where medicine is not a matter of herbs or knives, but of birthright. We move from the hands of the peasant woman, stained with soil, to the hands of the king, anointed with oil. For in this strange world, the ultimate cure is not found in a bottle, but in the touch of a monarch. From the humble, earth-floored cottage of the wise woman, we ascend to the absolute pinnacle of the medieval world. We leave behind the smell of drying herbs and wood smoke, and enter a realm of vaulted ceilings, stained glass, and the heavy, expensive scent of frankincense. We are in the royal court, perhaps Westminster in London, or the Louvre in Paris. Here, amidst the tapestries and the guards in livery, a ceremony is taking place that defies all modern medical logic. It is a moment where politics, religion, and medicine fuse into a single, golden act of theater. It is the ritual of the royal touch. The disease in question is specific and gruesome. It is known as scrofula, or medically, mycobacterial cervical lymphadenitis, a form of tuberculosis that infects the lymph nodes of the neck. It causes the glands to swell into large, hard lumps that eventually break open into weeping, open sores. It is ugly, painful, and in the Middle Ages, practically endemic. But the common people have another name for it, the king's evil. And the name implies the cure. If the evil belongs to the king, then only the king can take it away. Imagine the scene. It is a feast day, perhaps Easter or Pentecost. A crowd has gathered at the palace gates, hundreds of them, all bearing the distinctive disfiguring marks of the disease. They are not turned away. Instead, they are ushered into the great hall. This is one of the few times in history when the unwashed masses are permitted to breathe the same air as the monarch. They shuffle forward, a line of suffering humanity, moving toward a figure seated on a dais. The king, be it Edward the Confessor, Louis IX, or a later Stuart monarch, sits in his robes of state. He is not just a ruler. He is the anointed one, chosen by God. In the medieval mind, the coronation oil has fundamentally changed his biology, imbuing his very flesh with a divine curative power. The ritual is solemn. The king does not wear gloves. As each patient approaches and kneels, the monarch reaches out. He places his bare hands directly onto the swollen, festering sores of the subject's neck. He strokes the cheek or the throat, sometimes making the sign of the cross over the wound. In England, the chaplain standing nearby intones the words, "The king touches thee, God cures thee." It is a moment of profound intimacy. The most powerful man in the kingdom, whose hands usually hold a scepter or a sword, is now touching the most wretched part of his poorest subject. There is a shock in this contact. The velvet against the rags, the gold against the sore. For the peasant, trembling on his knees, this is not just medical treatment. It is a miracle. To be touched by the king is to be touched by heaven. The psychological impact is explosive. In a world where the poor are invisible, this moment of recognition acts as a powerful placebo, flooding the body with hope and adrenaline. After the touch, the king's almoner hands the patient a gold coin, a touch piece, often an angel, so named for the image of the archangel Michael slaying a dragon stamped upon it. The king hangs this coin around the patient's neck with a ribbon. It is a talisman, a physical piece of the cure to be worn forever. And here lies a pragmatic, hidden truth of the royal touch. The coin is valuable. For a starving peasant, that gold piece represents months of food. Better nutrition means a stronger immune system, which might actually help the body fight off the tuberculosis. In a roundabout, economic way, the king really is curing them, though perhaps more through his treasury than his fingers. Historians still debate the cynicism of this practice. Did the kings actually believe they could heal? Some, like the saintly Louis IX of France, performed the ritual with genuine pious humility, washing the feet of the poor and fasting beforehand. Others likely found it a repulsive chore. We know that Queen Elizabeth I was reluctant at first, fearing it was too Catholic, but eventually embraced it as a vital political tool to prove her legitimacy. Charles II of England touched nearly 100,000 people during his reign, an industrial-scale production line of miracles that surely left the royal hands cramping and the royal nose assaulted by the stench of the crowd. And the strangest part? It often worked. Scrofula is a capricious disease. It often goes into spontaneous remission on its own. The swelling goes down, the sores scab over, and the patient feels better. If this natural recovery happened weeks or months after the visit to the palace, the king got the credit. I was touched. The peasant would tell his village, showing off the scar and the gold coin, and the evil left me. These testimonials cemented the myth. It was a self-reinforcing loop of confirmation bias that kept the monarchy secure and the queues long. There is a soft, ironic humor in the logistics of the event. Records show that the kings often washed their hands furiously with rose water and vinegar immediately after the ceremony. A very human reaction to touching hundreds of infected necks. One can imagine the king smiling benedictions at the crowd while mentally screaming for a basin of hot water. It reminds us that behind the crown was just a man, likely terrified of catching the very thing he was supposed to be curing. The royal touch represents the ultimate fusion of the medieval worldview. The belief that the social order was also a biological order. The king was the head of the body politic, and his health determined the health of the nation. To cure the subject was to heal the state. It was a beautiful, cohesive lie that held society together. It suggested that there was a solution to suffering, and that solution sat on the throne. But as the centuries wore on, the magic began to fade. The rise of skepticism, the Reformation, and the slow creep of scientific thought began to chip away at the divinity of kings. William III of England, a dour Dutchman who had little patience for such superstition, is said to have touched a patient and muttered, "May God give you better health and more sense." It was the beginning of the end. The ritual would eventually die out, replaced by the cold, hard realization that kings are just men, and bacteria do not care about crowns. Yet for a long time, it offered something that no herbalist or surgeon could, a sense of connection. In that brief moment of contact, the gap between the highest and the lowest vanished. The sufferer was seen. The pain was acknowledged by the highest power in the land, but even the king's touch has its limits. It can cure the evil of the neck, but it cannot stop the evil that is coming now. The wind is shifting again. We are leaving the golden halls of the palace. The sky is turning a bruised, unnatural purple. The rats are moving in the cellars. The fleas are restless. A ship has just docked in a Sicilian port, carrying a cargo that will make the king's evil look like a mild annoyance. The greatest test of medieval medicine is about to arrive. The masquerade of the royal court is over. The dance of death is about to begin. The golden coin of the king has been spent. The velvet of the court has rotted away. We have arrived at the year 1347, the moment the medieval world breaks. The wind blowing from the east does not carry spices or silk anymore. It carries silence. It begins in the ports, Messina, Genoa, Marseille. Sailors stumble off ships with black swellings in their groins and armpits, vomiting blood, delirious with pain. Within days, they are dead. Within weeks, the cities are graveyards. This is the great mortality, the pestilence, the Black Death, and walking through the grey fog of this apocalypse is a figure who has become the very avatar of terror, the Plague Doctor. We see him in our nightmares, a tall, gaunt figure draped in a floor-length coat of waxed leather, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and most terrifying of all, a mask shaped like the beak of a giant bird. He looks like a supernatural entity, a grim reaper sent to harvest souls. But strip away the horror, and you find a desperate, logical attempt at engineering. The beaked sentinel is not a demon. He is a hazmat suit. Historians often point out a fascinating anachronism here. The fully realized beaked doctor costume, invented by Charles de Lorme, actually belongs to the 17th century, the twilight of the plague years, rather than the medieval peak of the 1340s. The medieval doctor likely wore heavy robes and held a sponge soaked in vinegar to his nose. But the idea of the sentinel, the figure armored against the air, separating himself from humanity to save it, is born in this moment. He walks the empty streets where the shutters are slammed tight and marked with red crosses. He is the only thing moving in a landscape of corpses. Examine his armor. The coat is heavy, often Moroccan leather, waxed and oiled. This is not for style. It is to make the fabric impermeable to the miasma and unknowingly to the fleas. The wide-brimmed hat indicates his profession, a signal to others to keep their distance. But it is the mask that captivates. The beak is not a fashion statement. It is a gas mask. It is 6 inches long, filled with a potent mixture of dried flowers, herbs, camphor, and spices. Theriac, ambergris, mint, and rose petals are stuffed into the cone. The doctor breathes through this filter, believing that if the sweet smell overpowers the stench of death, the disease cannot enter his lungs. The glass eyes of the mask protect him from the evil eye of the patient, a look believed to transmit the sickness. He is a man sealed inside a sensory deprivation tank of his own making, breathing his own recycled perfumed air while the world rots around him. In his gloved hand, he carries a long wooden stick. This is his extension, his tactile barrier. With it, he lifts the bedsheets of the sick to examine the buboes, the apple-sized black-purple swellings of the lymph nodes. He uses it to push away the desperate hands of the dying who beg for water or absolution. He never touches a patient with his skin. The stick is a symbol of the profound isolation of his trade. He is there, but he is not there. He is a witness behind glass. The treatments he offers are a grim catalogue of desperation. He might lance the buboes with a knife, believing that releasing the pus will release the poison. He might apply a poultice of tree resin, white lilies, and dried human excrement to the sores. In a moment of supreme tragic irony, he might prescribe emerald powder. crushed gemstones mixed with water to the wealthy, while the poor are told to simply sit in the sewers, on the logic that the bad air of the plague might be driven out by the worse air of the waste. It is a world where logic has inverted itself, where filth is the cure for death. The doctor's presence is a double-edged sword. To the family peering through the window, he is a sign that help has arrived, but he is also a harbinger of doom. He is often a community doctor, hired by the town council when the regular physicians have fled or died. His contract is brutal. He must treat everyone, rich and poor alike, and he must not leave the city. He is paid well, but he rarely lives to spend it. The mortality rate for plague doctors is astronomical. The fleas that carry the bacteria, Yersinia pestis, can easily hop through a gap in the leather or hide in the folds of a robe. The sentinel often becomes the victim, his beak falling silent as the fever takes him. There is a dark, soft humor in the way the doctor is perceived by the survivors. He is known as Il Dottore in the Commedia dell'arte, a buffoonish figure who spouts gibberish Latin and misdiagnoses everything. It is a way for the people to cope with the trauma, to laugh at the man who could not save them. They mock his beak, calling him Dr. Beaky or the Crow, turning the symbol of their fear into a caricature. It is a defense mechanism, a way to reclaim power from the helplessness of the epidemic. But in the room with the dying, there is no laughter. The doctor stands over the bed, the glass eyes reflecting the flicker of the candle. He measures the pulse, though he knows it doesn't matter. He offers the Four Thieves vinegar, a legendary concoction of vinegar infused with sage, wormwood, and rosemary, supposedly used by looters who robbed plague victims without getting sick. He pours it down the patient's throat. It burns, it tastes of acid and earth, but it is better than doing nothing. The human need to act, to fight, even when the enemy is invincible, is the most powerful force in the room. The scale of the death he witnesses is incomprehensible. In some cities, half the population vanishes. The cemeteries are full, so broad trenches are dug, and the bodies are stacked in layers, like lasagna, as one chronicler grimly noted. The doctor's job shifts from healer to accountant. He counts the dead. He marks the doors. He enforces the quarantine, nailing families inside their homes to die together. He becomes the jailer of the sick. And yet, he keeps walking. Every morning, he dons the leather, straps on the beak, and steps out into the fog. Why? Perhaps for the money, perhaps for the fame. But perhaps, for some, it is a duty, a refusal to let humanity die alone. The beaked sentinel is a terrifying figure, yes, but he is also a figure of endurance. He is the last man standing when the world falls apart. As the winter sets in, the plague begins to recede, not because of the doctor's spices, but because the cold kills the fleas. The fog lifts. The doctor removes his mask. His face is pale, marked by the pressure of the leather straps. His eyes haunted by the thousands he could not save. He hangs up the beak, the stick, and the coat. He has survived the great dying. But the world he steps back into is changed. The blind faith in ancient authorities has been shaken. Galen didn't stop the plague. The church didn't stop the plague. The old answers have failed. The silence left by the dead is eventually filled by a new sound, the rustling of pages. The failure of the old medicine creates a vacuum, a hunger for something new, something that actually works. We are moving now from the dark, desperate experimentation of the plague years to a glimmer of light on the horizon. The next chapter of our story comes from the edges of the map, bringing with it a wisdom that has been preserved while the West was burning. The beak is laid to rest, and a book is opened. The heavy leather coat of the plague doctor falls to the floor, and the grey miasmatic fog of the European winter dissolves. We are traveling now, carried on a warm, dry wind that smells of saffron, roasted coffee, and the dust of ancient sandstone. The silence of the graveyard is replaced by the gentle, rhythmic splashing of a fountain and the scratching of a reed pen on polished paper. We have crossed the Mediterranean, leaving the mud of the West for the golden light of the East. While Europe huddled in the ruins of the Roman Empire, trying to remember how to read its own history, the Islamic world was busy writing the future. We find ourselves in Baghdad, Damascus, or perhaps Cairo, inside the cool, high walls of Abimaristan. The word means house of the sick, but to compare this to the European hospital is like comparing a university to a stable. Step onto the tiled floor. It is immaculately clean, swept every hour. Sunlight filters through intricate geometric lattices, casting patterns of light and shadow that shift with the day. The air does not smell of rot. It smells of rosewater and vinegar, circulated by wind catchers that pull the cool breeze down from the roof. Here, medicine is not a desperate gamble or a theological mystery. It is a rigorous, organized science. The shelves of the library for every hospital here has a massive library, are groaning under the weight of knowledge. And at the center of this intellectual empire sits a book that will define medicine for 5 centuries, Al-Qanun fi al-Tib, or the Canon of Medicine, written by the brilliant Ibn Sina, known to the West as Avicenna. Imagine a book so comprehensive it attempts to catalog every single thing that can go wrong with the human body, and every single thing that can fix it. It is a continent of ink. Ibn Sina, a prodigy who had memorized the Quran by age 10 and was treating sultans by 18, wrote with a clarity that the West had lost. He did not just repeat the Greeks, he organized them, corrected them, and expanded them. He described the contagion of tuberculosis, the way diseases spread through water and soil, and the intricate anatomy of the eye. To the European doctor, the body is a confused battleground of humors. To Ibn Sina, it is a machine of exquisite logic. Walk through the wards of the Bimaristan. You notice something immediately. The quiet. There is a section dedicated specifically to mental illness. In Europe, the mad are chained or exorcised. Here, they are treated with music, the sound of flowing water, and gentle diet. Musicians sit by the beds, playing the oud and the flute, believing that the vibration of the strings can soothe the vibration of the soul. It is a form of therapy so humane, so advanced, that it will not be seen in the West again until the modern era. But the East is not just about soft music and philosophy. It is about steel and precision. Watch a surgeon at work in the ophthalmic ward. The Middle East, with its blowing sand and intense sun, was plagued by eye diseases, and so its doctors became the masters of vision. The surgeon holds a hollow needle, a syringe centuries ahead of its time. He is performing a suction removal of a cataract. In Europe, the treatment for a cataract is couching, shoving a blunt needle into the eye to push the cloudy lens into the back of the eyeball, a crude move that often leads to blindness. Here, the surgeon uses suction to extract the lens entirely. His hand is steady, guided by manuals that detail the layers of the cornea, with the precision of a map maker. Hygiene here is not a medical innovation, it is a religious mandate. The concept of wudu, ritual ablution before prayer, means that the average person in Baghdad washes their hands, face, and feet 5 times a day. The connection between cleanliness and health is baked into the culture. While a French king might boast of bathing twice in his life, a citizen of Cairo visits the hammam, public bath, weekly for a scrub that removes the grime of the city. This simple cultural difference likely saved millions of lives, creating a barrier against infection that the West simply did not have. Historians have long noted the irony that during the Crusades, when Christian knights were injured, they were often terrified of their own doctors, who might hack off a limb, and would sometimes secretly seek out Saracen healers who knew how to wash a wound with vinegar and stitch it closed with silk. There is a famous, perhaps apocryphal story of a Frankish doctor who saw an Islamic doctor treating a knight's abscess with a poultice. The Frankish doctor pushed him aside, grabbed a battle axe, and chopped the leg off, killing the knight instantly. Then turned to the crowd and said, "See, I have saved him from the pain." It is a dark joke, but it underscores the vast gulf in sophistication between the two worlds. And then there is Al-Razi, the Razis of Latin texts. He is the master of observation. While others were looking at the stars, he was looking at the skin. He was the first to clearly distinguish between smallpox and measles, writing a treatise that is a masterpiece of differential diagnosis. He famously chose the location for a new hospital in Baghdad by hanging pieces of meat in different quarters of the city. Where the meat rotted the slowest, he reasoned, the air was the cleanest, and there he built his clinic. It was a primitive, brilliant experiment in microbiology, conducted centuries before the microscope was invented. But the most beautiful part of this story is not the surgery or the baths, it is the bridge. Knowledge, like water, flows downhill. Slowly, inevitably, these echoes from the East began to seep back into the parched soil of Europe. It happened in the borderlands, in the sun-drenched gorges of Toledo in Spain, and the port of Salerno in Italy. Here, a unique class of men emerged, the translators. Picture a dusty room in Toledo. A Jewish scholar, fluent in Arabic and Spanish, sits next to a Christian monk who knows Spanish and Latin. Together, they perform a miracle. The scholar reads the Arabic text of Avicenna aloud in Spanish, and the monk translates the Spanish into Latin, scratching it onto parchment. It is a game of telephone, played with the highest stakes imaginable. Through this clumsy collaborative friction, the lost works of Galen and Hippocrates, along with the new masterpieces of Ibn Sina and Al-Razi, are injected back into the European bloodstream. These manuscripts, known as the Latin translations, traveled north, carried in the saddlebags of merchants and students. They arrived in Paris, Oxford, and Bologna, like unexploded bombs. When the European professors opened them, they were stunned. They found diagrams of the eye they had never seen. They found lists of drugs, camphor, senna, rhubarb, musk, that they had never tasted. They realized, with a shock of humility, that they had been asleep while the rest of the world was awake. There is a soft, human comedy in the margins of these translated texts. The Latin translators often didn't have words for the Arabic medical terms, so they just Latinized the Arabic sounds. The cephalic vein in your arm, it comes from the Arabic al-kifal, The basilic vein? From albaslik. Even the word soda, as in sodium, comes from the Arabic suda, meaning a splitting headache. Our modern medical language is a fossil record of this great transfer, a linguistic map of the journey from Baghdad to Bologna. As the sun sets over the Bimaristan, the call to prayer echoes from the minarets, a haunting melodic sound that drifts over the cooling courtyards. The fountain continues to splash, washing away the heat of the day. The patients sleep in clean beds, lulled by the sound of the water and the odid. The physicians pack away their instruments, wiping the steel clean. They do not know that their work is about to spark a revolution in the West. They are simply doing their job, maintaining the golden balance of the body. The ink on the translated parchments is drying. The books are being bound in leather, ready for their journey over the Alps. The long stagnation is ending. The medieval period is drawing to a close, and the seeds of something new, something bright, sharp, and dangerously curious have been planted. The East has remembered, so that the West might relearn. And now, as the dawn breaks over the spires of Italy, the light hits a new kind of mind. The reliance on ancient books is fading. The time for reading is over. The time for looking is beginning. We are moving to the final stage of our journey, to a dimly lit room in Padua, where a young man stands with a knife, ready to commit the ultimate taboo. He is about to open the human body, not to heal it, but to understand it. The morning of reason has arrived. The golden light of the East has done its work, illuminating the path. But now the torch is passed to a new generation, standing in the cool, grey dawn of northern Italy. The year is 1543. We are in the city of Padua, inside a wooden structure that looks like a funnel, a cone of tiered concentric rings rising steeply toward the ceiling. This is the anatomical theatre. The air here is freezing cold, deliberately so, for it is winter, the only season when the subject of tonight's lesson will not rot too quickly. The room smells of sawdust, wax, and the faint, sweet odor of mortality. It is crowded. Students, nobles, and even curious citizens lean over the railings, their breath forming clouds in the chill air. They are looking down into the pit, the center of the cone, where a single table stands, illuminated by a chandelier of candles. On the table lies a body. It is the corpse of a criminal, executed only hours ago, his debt to society paid, his service to science just beginning. And standing over him is not a robed lector reading from a book while a barber cuts, but a young man with a knife in his own hand. His name is Andreas Vesalius. He is 28 years old, brash, brilliant, and impatient. He is about to perform an act of intellectual violence that will shatter the medieval world forever. For 1,000 years, the teaching of anatomy was a passive ritual. A professor sat in a high chair, the cathedra, reading the Latin texts of Galen aloud. Below him, a lowly surgeon hacked at a body, often a dog or a pig, pointing to the parts as they were named. If the body didn't match the book, the body was assumed to be wrong, or the corruption of nature was blamed. Galen was the infallible pope of medicine. To question him was heresy. But Vesalius does not sit. He stands. He pushes the barber aside. He picks up the scalpel. He demands that the students look not at the book, but at the text of the flesh. He makes an incision, peeling back the skin of the chest. The theatre falls silent, the tension vibrating in the cold air. Vesalius points to the breastbone. Galen wrote that the sternum consists of 7 segments, like that of an ape. Vesalius counts them out loud, his voice echoing in the wooden funnel. 1, 2, 3. Only 3. He moves to the liver. Galen said the liver has 5 lobes. Vesalius lifts the organ, glistening and dark in the candlelight. It has 2. A murmur runs through the crowd. It is a moment of vertigo. If Galen was wrong about the bone and the liver, what else was he wrong about? The realization hits them like a physical blow. The ancient master had never dissected a human. He had extrapolated from monkeys, pigs, and dogs, and for 15 centuries, humanity had treated itself based on the anatomy of a barnyard animal. Vesalius is not just cutting a body. He is cutting the cord that tethers the present to the past. He is declaring that the truth is not found in ink, but in observation. Non loqui sed videre, not to speak, but to see. This is the birth of the scientific method in medicine. It is the shift from why to how. The medieval mind asked why a man was sick. Was it sin? Was it Saturn? Was it an imbalance of bile? The new mind asks how the body works. How does the muscle pull the bone? How does the valve stop the blood? The body is no longer a mysterious vessel of fluids. It is a machine. It is a structure of pulleys, levers, pumps, and pipes. It is a fabrica, a factory, a workshop, a fabric. And this new vision is not just scientific, it is artistic. In the shadows of this era, artists like Leonardo da Vinci had already been peeling back the skin, dissecting in secret by candlelight, to understand the musculature of their subjects. Their drawings were hidden, private studies of the divine architecture. But Vesalius brings this into the light. He commissions artists, likely from the studio of Titian, to draw what he reveals. The result is the De Humani Corporis Fabrica, a massive leather-bound book that is published the same year Copernicus declares the earth revolves around the sun. The pages are filled with woodcuts of breathtaking beauty and horror. Skeletons lean casually against columns, pondering their own mortality. Flayed men, their muscles exposed in perfect anatomical detail, stand in landscapes of rolling Italian hills. These are not the crude, cartoonish zodiac men of the medieval manuscripts. These are maps of the new world. The printing press, the internet of its day, carries these images across Europe. A doctor in London can now see the same interior reality as a doctor in Padua. The monopoly of the local expert is broken. The transition is not instant. The old guard fights back. They call Vesalius a madman, a disrespecter of the dead. But the door has been opened, and it cannot be shut. In England, William Harvey will soon look at the heart and realize it is a pump, circulating the blood in a closed loop, destroying the Galenic idea that blood is constantly consumed and recreated. In the Netherlands, Anthony van Leeuwenhoek will grind lenses of glass so perfect they reveal a universe of animalcules in a drop of water, proving that life exists beyond the naked eye. The miasma theory will eventually fall, replaced by the germ theory. The barber's blade will be replaced by the sterile scalpel. The prayers will remain, but they will be joined by penicillin. There is a final, lingering poignancy in the anatomical theater. As the lesson ends, the candles burn low. The students file out, their minds racing with the heresy they have just witnessed. The body on the table is covered. It was a criminal, a sinner, a nobody. Yet, in this moment of the morning of reason, he has become the most important teacher in the room. His silent flesh has spoken the truth that 1,000 books could not. The medieval night, with its demons, its smells, its vague terrors, and its comforting superstitions, is fading. The sun is rising over a world that is sharper, colder, and infinitely more complex. The filthy truth of medieval medicine was a story of humanity groping in the dark, trying to heal with the only tools it had: faith, tradition, and a high tolerance for pain. It was a time of immense suffering, yes, but also of immense endurance. We look back at them, the leech gatherers, the wise women, the barber surgeons, the plague doctors, not with scorn, but with a quiet respect. They were the pioneers walking through the swamp so that we could build the road. They drank the vinegar so we could swallow the pill. They bore the scar so we could have the cure. The candle in the anatomical theater has flickered out. The busy streets of the medieval city, with their noise and their smells, are fading into the velvet silence of history. The great wheel of the zodiac slows to a stop above us. You are no longer in the cold stone halls of the past. You are back in the warmth and safety of your own bed. The history we have traversed is heavy, but you do not need to carry it. It is written, it is done, and it is resting. Let the images of the barber's bowl and the apothecary's garden dissolve into soft, abstract shapes behind your closed eyelids. The pain of those centuries is gone, leaving only the quiet peace of the present moment. Your breath is steady, an anchor in the gentle dark. The world is safe, the night is still, and the story has ended. Let the silence wrap around you like a heavy, warm blanket. Sweet dreams.